people doing in their struggle against the regime? Clear something up for me, would you? What's the difference between the establishment and the system, Glanamore? I'm not clear on the technical terms.
You may not be first up against the wall, Mingus, but you're a contender.
You know what I don't see anymore? I don't see underground newspapers. Norman!
Norman, where?
I thought I saw him in the outer office. Norman?
Is he back from New Haven?
Leon? Robert?
Norman,
Now, how are you, Stuart?
Oh, fine, thanks. Hey, have you read this?
how was your trip?
Oh, good trip. I had first class practically to myself.
Oh, thank God. I was worried about that. Fine, thank you. Parker has my number. Glanamore's turned my name into the committee of 10. I have 1,000 papers to grade. My students bore me almost as much as I bore them. I don't get mail. On my salary, inflation is kicking my brains in, and I haven't been invited to a party in months. Did I tell you I think I'm getting an earache?
Well, into each life some rain must fall.
Yes, and the sharecroppers could use it.
Glanamore is reading about this plot to exploit the workers by giving them paid vacations. He says it's a conspiracy between the ruling class and the picture postcard interests.
What's wrong with you, Mingus, that you've fallen away from humanity? You wish all the jerks were dead. You're a dangerous man.
How do you like that? I've offended him, with all he's got to worry about. How things are in Glacamora, the rotten rolls for women and red Indians and films. What was it like in New Haven, Norman? Are the Cabots still speaking to the lodges?
That's Boston, I think.
East is east, Norm. I just hear the name Yale and I go all booby. I see spires, I see proctors, I see book bags by J. Press. Young men named Merriweather poling their punts along the green and racing to tip their batman and bribe the night porter after a lark. I see them in their thatched dorms before lights out and great crowds of them crossing the quad with their chums. After your lecture, Norm. After your lecture. Did they stamp their feet in place?
Mingus.
Or did they just applaud? Did you hear the Whiffenpoof call your name? If you fell from high table, would you hurt yourself?
They just applauded.
Ah, you see, Mingus, the colleague's coming.
Hey,
Gentlemen.
hey, it's high table here. What's wrong with you, Monroe? Blackbird? You don't brown bag it at high table.
Norman was telling us about his talk at Yale. Mingus has been indulging some curious Ivy League fantasy.
Once the tower determined it was not an invasion, the Air Force chaps are really very decent about it. Almost as though they were used to bailing out the civilian arm. They sent us on into Harvard on buses.
That must have cost the taxpayers a bundle.
There's room at the table, Malcolm.
Malcolm looks like cloud cover.
Has anyone seen Naomi Finsberg?
She could still be in class.
Sure, she could have had one of her insights and bumped into a wall.
Look at this. Monroe's got a fish sandwich. That isn't fresh, is it?
Well, Dave, in a way it is. When I caught it this summer, I froze it at once in a special ice pack I rigged up.
Malcolm can have my seat. I had lunch on the plane.
Did you manage to see my old friend Starbuck when you were in New Haven?
Oh, we were to have dinner, but Rona rang up to say he was ill.
Was it a cover story, you think?
I didn't inquire.
I think the drinking started again. You know, my son tells me he almost never meets his classes.
Tim gets the BLT.
Here.
The yogurt without fruit is Dick's. The yogurt with is Bill Simpson's.
Here.
There wasn't any Diet Pepsi in the machine, so I got Sprite. If that isn't okay, I'll drink it.
I drink Sprite.
Doesn't George get a lunch?
George doesn't do lunch in public.
Don't start
He
up,
once told me
Mingus.
he's never eaten in a restaurant. Is that true, George?
Eating's an intimate act. Of course, I've dined in restaurants, but only with relatives. In an uncle's club, say, with an aunt after opera.
The blood again. The deep end of the gene pool.
Blood? I've never boasted my blood, Mingus. Genes aren't in it. This isn't biology I do. These uncles...
Again, the uncles.
I was a boy founded by uncles. They were called Thomas and William and George and John.
Those ain't uncles. They're colleges. Benny's an uncle. Sid is an uncle.
Come on, Leon. Let George tell about his uncles. I had uncles, too.
Sure you did, Tim. Guys in ribbed undershirts with religious medals hanging around their necks. And they weren't uncles either. They were brothers. Go on, George. What happened back there at the round table?
This wasn't the round table. My nostalgia isn't political. Economic, certainly. I would never have made it if it weren't for a spectacular roll of bull markets, some grandeur notion of how to live. Parker?
You're asking me?
To this day, I pinch myself that they pay me to profess literature and that I don't have to dip into capital. I would remind you, Mingus, that the open motor car is a reality, too. The Hamptons are. And a theory of lunch as a sacrament between the time you spend in the library on your hobby and your nap, your swim, And your sale?
It's always summer in that guy's memories.
July, yes, the first part of August.
Georgie's cousins all came out in the Times.
I'm going to tell you something which you may find difficult to believe, Mingus. But whenever someone jumped from a burning building in those days, I could read all about it in the Times. They just didn't print the photograph, that's all.
That's all. How'd you find out what girls looked like in their underpants?
Oh, come on, Mingus.
Maybe your cousin showed
That's
you.
largely true. My first wife was my first cousin.
Like Eleanor, like Franklin.
No, Eleanor was Louise's child. They were second cousins.
Because our sort are often stuck on ourselves. Alliance, affiliation, fans of connections, roots boosters, families jingos, and love like hometown pride.
Listen to this. He talks as if incest were a sort of good breeding.
Who said anything about breeding? We were eclectic as hippies. Who marries the showgirls or runs off with the Jew? Who fathers the bastards and aborts below stairs? We gamble at cockfights, we cheat on exams, we hide from our creditors, we total our cars. Uncle John had it as an article of faith that if a son didn't create a major scandal by the time he was 19, there was something wrong with the child.
The hijinks of high birth.
We're slobs, Mingus. We eat salad with our fingers. We pick our noses. Uncle William used to scratch himself with the tableware, and Uncle George always bathed in someone else's bathwater because he believed that only then was the temperature just right.
Wasn't your Uncle William the one they were always trying to blackmail us?
I never heard this.
He was an architect of temporary structures for the government. He designed the barracks that the Navy adopted in World War II and the platform for 4 presidential inaugurals. He built reviewing stands for parades and was awarded the contract on all the portable latrines used at officially sanctioned demonstrations during the Eisenhower administration.
There's money in this?
The blackmailers thought so.
Blackmailer. There was more than one.
Never at the same time, I think, but Uncle William was subject to blackmail the way other people are susceptible to poison ivy. If Father told him once, he must have told him 100 times, "You must not pose with these people in the nude," he would say. "Well, what did you expect?" he would ask. "The little boy himself told you what to put into the letter."
George wasn't the only one with eccentric uncles, and they didn't have to be rich to have idiosyncrasies. We had them in Utah.
Good, you're still here.
It's the insight lady. On a clear day, she can see forever.
I was reading Jung's thesis about Nordic racial abstractions and dreams. I mean, the man is absolutely right, but there was something very troubling about it. I couldn't put my finger on it. I was up half the night trying to figure out what it might be. Then, this morning, a student just happened to say something in class about Hitler's Mein Kampf, and I suddenly realized what it was. To be literarily boring is to be morally dangerous. It's so plain.
I don't agree. Dangerous ideas by their very nature are non-literary. Literature deals with the contemplation of life, with arrangement, not rearrangement. The literary faculty is not an imaginative so much as a critical one. A lifeless, degraded form, or even an evil content once subjected to classification, loses its power to influence. Where are you going? Where'd you go?
Out.
Dick, if you're having more coffee, could you give me a cup?
What are you taking it?
Sugar substitute.
That stuff will kill you.
The caffeine neutralizes the mutagens.
Yeah? Where'd you hear that, Blackbird?
The French have done a study. The synergistic properties of the
Synergistic?
active agents ineffectuate the chemistry when the saccharin is in sodium form.
Then this stuff is all right to use.
Never put it on beef.
Excuse me, Nancy. I don't mean to interrupt your lunch, but could you just tell me if that man from Detroit ever called back?
Isn't there a note in your box?
Oh, of course, I didn't even think to look.
What does he think those boxes are for?
Lunch.
Did you decide about a car, Bill?
Well, you know, it's funny about that. I hate like the dickens to buy a foreign car with the economy in the shape it's in, and Consumer Reports isn't crazy about the domestic product. Al Unstall thinks I ought to wait. See, he's worked on my wife's station wagon since she got it. Well, that's 8 years. No, wait. No, it's going to be 8 years next month. See, it had 97,432 miles on it when Dolores pulled it into the driveway last night.
Couldn't drive it, huh?
Oh, yes, Nancy, here it is. I see it. He wants me to call back. Could you, Nancy?
Oh,
Why don't you tell him to wait, Nancy? Tell him you're eating your lunch. They're just exploiting you because you're a secretary.
that's all right. I don't really want my cake anyway. You all can share it.
What's that? Carob? Chocolate, isn't it?
Oh.
You on a diet, Dave?
I thought it was carob.
Dave won't eat American. He's not like Bill, who won't buy Japanese. Dave won't eat white bread if he can get pita. He won't touch hamburger if he can get gyro. He lives in the Midwest, but he's got these WOG taste buds, this PLO appetite. He goes to Norwegian restaurants, for God's sake. You know something, Dave? You eat above your station.
St. John's bread.
What's that, Arnold?
Carob, St. John's bread, after St. John the Baptist, said to have lived on honey and locusts through a confusion of locusts with the carob pod, which was the edible portion of a kind of evergreen indigenous to the Mediterranean region.
Who the hell would make a mistake like that?
Well, Unstall says I ought to hold on to the Ford. It's probably good for another 16,250 miles.
Tell me something. Is it 16,250 or 16,200 and something else, and you're just rounding it off? How can something like that be known?
Consumer Reports runs a special issue on used cars. Al Unstall's a mechanic, 32 years, and the Automobile Club checked the car out in their diagnostic clinic.
You go to all this trouble? You really do?
If you're not a brave man, you have to be a careful one.
Cars are more trouble than they're worth. Back in Utah, when I was a kid, nobody had them. Even rich people rode horseback. You'd have to go all the way to Salt Lake City or maybe to Provo to see traffic. A car couldn't take you any place you'd really want to go.
You were a different breed, Monroe.
Well, we were. We really were. I'm a good shot with a rifle, even today, but I was never, much a team sport. Baseball, football, that sort of thing. But hunting, fishing, horseback riding, hiking activities that, a boy could excel at if he was disciplined and had a talent for concentration and enjoyed being outdoors and solving the problems of nature. That was my thing.
Did you catch only what you needed for lunch? Did you hassle a cougar only if you intended to eat it? Did you never point your gun unless you meant to kill?
Oh, didn't anyone want my cake?
No one was hungry, and Monroe won't touch pastry. He hasn't skinned himself.
Come on, Mingus.
Oh, that's all right. Mingus just doesn't understand the father and son sports. But even afterwards, when I left Utah and came east to college and didn't have the mountains to hunt in or the rivers and streams for the wild game fish, I won't fish stocked waters.
Nor would I.
Now, I turned to tennis and golf for recreation. Things a man can do by himself, or maybe with a trusted sidekick. But it's not the same. I know it. And even if I did get to be pretty good at them, even if I could take a man like Mingus here and probably spot him 5 holes on a golf course, or 4 sets in a tennis match.
19.
It isn't the same thing as being there on your own. I'm not talking about the trails. Trails are for tourists. I was a guide when I was 10 years old. I had to be. My father was never really at home in that country. But those people were eager. I'll say that for them. And some of them caught on pretty quick. Fat men from the east.
Easy.
The unlikeliest cowboys you ever saw. The unlikeliest fishermen, too. Afraid of bait. Oh, if you can believe such a thing. But I'd take 'em out. The father and son sports. Mingus is right. Westerners were different. Big, independent, spit-in-your-eye men. I had this uncle, my mother's brother. He was like that.
Norman, come in. What did Motown have to say? Are they hiring on at GM?
Well, as a matter of fact, it was about a job.
Monroe was telling us about his uncle.
Well, that's all right.
Hey, Monroe, I'm sorry. I thought you'd wrapped it up.
That's all right. You're offered a post at a university in Detroit.
Look at this. I've hurt the big fisherman's feelings.
Excuse me. I have a conference with a student in exactly 5 minutes.
You scheduled a conference for 23 minutes to 1?
I was
Quiet, Malcolm.
I was unaware when I scheduled it that it would conflict with the scene you've arranged.
If you leave this room, I'll take it that you voted to deny me tenure.
Oh, Mingus.
No, everything embarrasses that guy. What is he, some artist of avoidance? I'm not civil enough for him?
Oh, that's all right.
Didn't they tell him when he agreed to cross the Hudson that it might get vulgar? Hey, you, King George, what'd you think? It's the land of the midnight vulgar here.
Indeed.
Indeed, indeed.
You were offered a position in Detroit, were you, Norman?
The Dean of Arts and Sciences at Wayne State offered the Arthur Maratti Chair of Literary Criticism. Could you just make a note of that, Nancy, from my personnel file? You may say that the salary and duties were discussed, but that I did not encourage further negotiation.
All right.
Gosh.
The Milton scholar says, gosh.
Who was Arthur Maratti?
Congratulations, Norman. That's very impressive.
Arthur Maratti designed the classic lunch pail for blue-collar workers.
Oh, is that true?
When Henry Ford developed the idea for the assembly line, Maratti is said to have said, "They'll have to eat." He became a millionaire.
What figure did they have in mind, Norman?
Really, Mingus?
Norman doesn't mind, Parker. Do you, Norman?
It's an endowed chair. He said I would have $60,000 a year.
$60,000 a year. They'll have to eat. Typical.
Great country, ain't it, Glanamore?
A $3,000 travel allowance comes with it.
Josh?
3,000? I don't get that much for teaching my night school class.
You'd have to live in Detroit. The SAT scores for entering freshmen are somewhat lower in Detroit.
Plus $2,000 for typing.
Is he through, do you think?
The way I see it, gentlemen, all any of us can do now is either confess the most shameful thing he's ever done or announce his salary.
If they paid me that kind of money, they could have my academic freedom back.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset anyone. Leon asked. Well, anyway, I'm not taking the job. Quite satisfied where I am.
I wonder if it's still open.
I make almost that much here, you know. Also, I have my royalties and my speaker's fees, and I'm doing my op-ed column for the Times twice a month now, you know.
My swine pudding has lost its savor. I think my yak butter has turned.
What were you saying about your Uncle Monroe? I really didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, that's all right.
No, go on.